Welcome back to the shop, friends. I want to go over a little problem today that's plagued a lot of people, and that is their dash in their car, like the Holley dash, 7-inch dash or the Pro dash. It resets whenever they crank the car. Whenever they hit the starter button, the dash immediately goes haywire. So you can't see your oil pressure or anything else that's going on until the car is actually running and the dash is rebooted. And it's plagued a lot of people. There's been little devices to plug in the wire to try to overcome the problem, but I want to get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is there is a voltage drop to your dash when you engage your starter, and that indicates that your car is not wired correctly. And you hate if you want, but when a device that you've wired in your car does not have the voltage it needs to run properly, then you haven't wired the car right. So if you have a short attention span, just know that you didn't wire your car right. You need to change some stuff. If you want to hang in there with me for about 10 minutes, we're going to go over how most guys do it, where they make the mistake, why this happens, and how to prevent it, and how to do better the next time you wire your car. So a little diagram here. This is generally how people will lay out a race car. I'll just go over the components in case my artistic skills are lacking and you're not able to understand what's here. We have a battery. We'll just say it's a 12-volt battery. We have a short cable that goes to the main disconnect switch. That would be the switch in the back of your car on the bumper or wherever you mounted it. And then we generally have a long cable that goes to the firewall area. And most guys will use a firewall mounted stud. And that's a nice clean job. You have a long cable here to the firewall stud. The stud goes through the firewall, and then you have a short cable from there to the starter. And look at that, you've got a great point to pick up 12 volts or battery voltage for anything you want to run in the car. And for a lot of guys, that would be their switch panel. And power comes from here, goes to the switch panel. When you activate the switches, the power goes out to the dash and the other devices on your car, water pump, whatever you have. So that looks nice, it's easy, but it has a fatal flaw. Now, remember, we're talking about voltage drops, and we know the dash does not like them. Basically, this dash will operate on 10 volts, it'll operate on 9 volts, it'll operate on 8 volts, but at 7.99 volts, it doesn't come on. And if you have it powered up and the voltage drops below that 8, and I'm just using 8 as an arbitrary number, it may not be 8, it may be 6, but there's a number that dash drops below and it doesn't work anymore. And that's why it's resetting, because it's dropping below that threshold. So why does that happen? Well, starters have their highest, electric motors actually have the highest amp draw at stall. And that means that it's not turning, it's just powers to it, but it hasn't started rotating yet. And that is the highest torque of the electric motor, and that is also the highest amp draw. So, and it can be a big number. Like, it might only take 50 amps to crank your engine continuously, right? But when you first hit the button, it might be 200 amps, right? It could be 400 amps. I don't know what your car is, but trust me, it's a big number. When you very first hit that button, it's several times more than the amp load that it sees just to crank. And electronics, they think fast, so even though you only had that load just for a millisecond, here's what's happening. So all copper wire is rated for the amperage it can carry, and it's rated by how many volts it loses per foot. And what that means is, if you have a given piece of wire, you can look this stuff up with your wire. It'll say in the chart, it'll be, this piece of wire from this manufacturer with a 12 volt, 200 amp load it loses 1 volt for every 10 feet. You know, they give a number for how much you lose per foot, and that number is easily calculated, and it's in the charts with the wire. But for the sake of making this video kind of simple and easy to understand, just know that when you push the starter button, there's a tremendous amount of load for an instant going to that starter, being pulled through these cables. And just for simplicity, we're going to say that the wire that we all used, that it loses a 1/2 volt for every foot. So we have a foot here, a foot here, a foot here, a foot, a foot, a foot. All right. So what that means is if we take our voltmeter and we put the voltmeter, I left out a little piece of it. So internal resistance of the battery, that also matters. So whenever you engage a starter and while the engine's cranking, you're not going to see your 12.65 volts. You're going to see more like 10 volts. And that's just due to the internal battery voltage drop. But we're going to go with 10. So you'll see 10 here. All right. So when you put your voltmeter here and you crank the engine while the engine's cranking, you're going to see 10 volts here. On that instantaneous start where you have all that high amp draw, you come back here a foot away from the battery, you might only see 9.5. Okay. And you get down here and it's 9, and here it's 8.5, right? And it just, the farther you go, the more it drops. So 8, 7, 5, 7, 6, 5, 6. All right, so now at your firewall, you've only actually got 6 volts. In that instant, again, in that instant, you've only got 6 volts. Once it starts moving, this number probably goes up substantially. But in the instant when you first hit this button, you may only be at 6 volts here. So now your switch panel is only getting 6 volts. And if it's only getting 6, it can only give 6. And so now instead of 12, you got 6 going into your dash. Your dash says, nope, I can't run on 6, and it shuts off. Now once the starter starts moving, this 200 number becomes a 50 number. The 6 volts becomes 9. All right. And now you got 9 in, you got 9 out. So you have 9 here. The dash only needed 8. The dash starts booting back up and running again. So that's what's going on. And that's why your dash resets when you hit the starter. So now that we know what's going on and we understand why it's happening, we can look at ways to fix it. And it's pretty simple. So the first thing is you don't ever put electronics on the same cable that you have a starter hooked to. That's just a bad idea in general. Starters are noisy and they draw a lot of current and they pull the voltage down too much. So what you should be doing is running, and it could be a number 6 or 8 even. Depends on how much crap you got hooked up besides your Holley. If you just have your Holley and some coils and stuff, probably a number 8 is fine. If you're trying to run water pump, fan, headlights and stuff, then you might want to move to a 6. But we'll run a 6 to an 8 from here to our switch panel. All right. So when we do that, now we're only having the little voltage drop here for this short piece of cable. We're not experiencing any of these drops. When this starter comes on and it bangs 200 amps and it pulls this down to 6 volts here, we still have 9 here. We lost a little bit for this piece and the battery's internal loss, but we still have what we need to the switch panel, and that will keep the dash running. This cable is going to continue to lose voltage as it always has. The point is we're picking it up before the loss, and your dash will not reset if your car is wired that way. There is one exception. A shitty battery, like a battery that's discharged, half dead, still cranks the engine, but it's instead of 12 volts, your battery is sitting at 11. All right, and then when you hit the starter, your battery voltage goes down to 8, and the engine's cranking real slow. And then you lose a little bit of voltage in here, and now next thing you know, your dash is resetting. The other time that this will happen, regardless of fixing the wiring, is if you're using one of those really small lithium batteries. Those guys are notorious for really dropping to very low numbers when you first hit the starter. The battery itself drops. And so when the battery itself is dropping, you can't get blood from a turnip. So if the battery's only got 6 volts or 7 volts, that's all the dash is going to see. The dash is going to reset. The fix for that is most guys will run 2 of the small lithium batteries. They'll dedicate 1 just for the starter, and they will use 1 for everything else. So to recap, voltage drops cause the dash to reset. Starters draw a lot of amps when they first get going, and you should never hook your electronics to the wire out near the starter because your electronics will suffer all that voltage drop. That's all I got for now. Y'all have a great night.